Matt Walsh to the program. Might just mention, for those of you that live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area or the Houston area, he's going to be speaking. We'll talk a little bit about how you can hear him face-to-face and hear him live. He is a popular blogger, writer, speaker, father of twins, and he can be found at the mattwalshblog.com. Matt Walsh, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, Kerby, thanks for having me.
I appreciate you being on the program. Your piece, I think, is subtitled, Dear PBS, I Don't Think There's a Compassionate Way to Murder Infants. And it might be good for just a minute to explain this, because this is an attempt, I think, by at least a few women calling it After Tiller, to try to provide a humanizing portrait of these poor doctors that are engaged in late-term abortion. And I think you had some very important points and concerns about the fact that our tax dollars are going to it, and they were attempting to try to humanize something that probably doesn't deserve the attention PBS gave to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when it comes to tax dollars going to things, obviously the fact that our tax dollars actually go to Planned Parenthood, that's the greater concern. But as you mentioned, $40 million or whatever it is going to PBS. That's one of the reasons why we should be concerned about PBS airing this documentary. Which, you know, I didn't watch it on PBS. I found it online, and so I knew what I was talking about. I tried to watch it. I watched about maybe an hour of it, and I couldn't go further because it was so nauseating. But I think that the biggest concern with PBS airing this documentary, which isn't just a documentary that normalizes abortion, but we're talking about late-term partial birth abortion.
Yes.
And that's the biggest concern. It's not so much that tax money is funding PBS. In my mind, it's that this is once again this insidious effort on the part of media, on the part of the progressives to make abortion into something mainstream, and they're doing that by using words like, as you mentioned, compassionate, to describe these doctors who are, of course, going in and murdering fully developed infants.
You know, and I think you make 6 points, so we'll kind of go through them fairly quickly, and people can read your article, which we've posted there, and also find their way to your blog, because you post a very provocative and interesting comment where we broadcast actually can have a chance to meet you. But the first point you make is, okay, we should, as all pro-life individuals, condemn the fact that George Tiller, oftentimes known as Tiller the Killer, was killed. And the killing of babies did not justify another person in a vigilante act of killing him. But nevertheless, this was, I think, used in large part to sort of humanize these individuals who are performing abortions at such a late term that most people in the medical profession, certainly a very high percentage of Americans, have really deep concerns about.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, when Tiller was murdered, I obviously it should have been condemned, and I think it was condemned by almost every pro-lifer in the public eye. This is obviously not something that most pro-lifers believe in, which is why, despite how it's painted by the pro-abortion agenda, abortion doctors are not frequently murdered. Thank God. It's something that before Tiller, I'm not sure when the last time it was that it happened, but it's something that happens very infrequently. So obviously we don't believe in it. However, at the same time, if we are to really confront what these people are doing, they are murdering infants. They're serial killers of infants. And so when you really confront that, it's hard to not be overcome with rage and anger. And our job is to contain that and still have love and mercy for them. But I can understand how people would be overcome with that rage and anger. And I think the guy that killed him, he let that anger get the best of him. And obviously it has to be condemned. But we can't take that and then turn Tiller into a martyr, which is what they're trying to do.
Yes.
And use the fact that, abortion doctors are putting their lives on the line, which I'm not sure if that's really true. But even if it is, they're putting their lives on the line because they're doing something that a lot of people recognize as being horrible, despicable, and murderous. So that's why their lives are on the line, and it doesn't excuse the fact that people are threatening them, but it also doesn't make what they're doing any more laudable or credible.
Matt Walsh with us. And Matt, let me for just a minute maybe get personal, because you have twins. And I learned in reading this blog that your children, your two twins, were born premature and ended up in the ICU, the natal ICU. This has got to affect you pretty significantly, because you recognize that we have this sort of medical schizophrenia where sometimes a child that is born prematurely, maybe in the second trimester, they're working feverishly to save that child. And then you have some of these third trimester babies being killed by some of these late-term abortion doctors. And that's the term they use for it. And these are even more fully developed, perhaps in some cases, than some of these premature infants that we see in the NICU.
Oh, absolutely. I obviously I was against abortion and partial birth abortion before my kids were born, but I think it would be really difficult for anyone to spend some time in in this the infant intensive care unit, the NICU, and come away still in favor of partial birth abortion, because as you said, these are you're seeing babies in there. My kids were born premature, but they were out of the NICU in a couple of days, so it wasn't anything severe.
Right.
Yet when we were in there, we saw, there were babies that were born at 26, 27 weeks, and they certainly look human. They're very, very small, but they look human. And I can remember in particular, very sad that one baby that was in the NICU, I saw in there, and I came back the next day and the baby was, wasn't there anymore. And obviously they can't tell us what happened to the baby, but we could assume that tragically the baby passed away. So it's horrible to think that, according to some people, that baby was probably 26, 27 weeks when it was born. It died, and it didn't really count as a death, or it didn't count as a tragedy because it wasn't really a person. Wow. In the eyes of some people, it's a horrible thing to think.
We're going to take a break and continue our conversation with Matt Walsh. Let me again alert some of you that are in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Houston area. He's going to be speaking soon. You might also be able to meet him. And if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Alex McFarland made an attention-getting statement the other day. He said that if today were 1776, there would be no America. His reason was simple. Back in 1776, the Founding Fathers believed in natural law. Today, our leaders do not. Alex McFarland illustrates this by talking about abortion and the pro-life perspective that is missing from our national debate. He says the defense of life is a defense of the Constitution, and those who are afraid to stand for life and for absolute morality are putting our nation at risk. We can add other examples. The only way judges and legislatures can accept the notion of same-sex marriage is to reject the concept of natural law. The marriage laws in states were written by people who understand the importance of traditional marriage and the public purpose that definition has in society. The conflict we have today over various threats to religious liberty also go back to rejection of natural law. The framers of the Constitution understood the importance of such principles as freedom of conscience and freedom of association. Alex McFarland understands how natural law is important to our liberty. He says a society that recognizes natural law, as our Judeo-Christian society has long done, is a society that also maximizes liberty for individuals, unquote. He went on to explain that if someone wishes to practice homosexuality, go ahead, but don't tear down the framework that gives you the freedom to be gay. Without a natural law or biblical framework, the freedom we enjoy today will be lost. Alex McFarland talks about the iron fist of statism, or the iron fist of Sharia. We are beginning to see how statist views result in persecution of Christian businesses like Hobby Lobby and Chick-fil-A, and we're seeing how Sharia law in other countries results in the persecution of churches and Christians in general. We should be grateful that America began at a time when its leaders believed in natural law, and we should be concerned that so many of our leaders today no longer believe in it. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Matt Walsh with us. If you'd like to join our conversation today, talking about the PBS special on abortion after Tiller, and we'll get into some more aspects of that, but along the way, we'll take some phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll go to Anthony, listening on KYCC in California. Anthony, what would you like to share with us today?
Well, honestly, I am really against abortion. And, if all those people out there that are so pro-abortion, why don't they just abort people that we don't want, like people that believe in abortion?
Yeah, again, that's kind of what some people have said. Well, we need to get rid of the abortionists, but no. But there's a link, Matt, that I think maybe I can pick up on. We didn't have a very good line there with Anthony, and that is every argument for abortion really becomes an argument for infanticide. It becomes an argument for euthanasia, because if the arguments are that this child is not wanted, well, as Anthony just pointed out, they're unwanted people. If there's a justification for abortion because they might have a medical problem, well, if we know the child had a medical problem in the womb, we would allow abortion. Why do we wait? Why don't we just wait till we're sure there's a medical problem and then just not feed it? That's infanticide. The arguments don't stay in the womb. The arguments for abortion lead to a complete loss of the sanctity of human life, don't they?
Sure, absolutely. If you either value life or you don't. Life is either sacred to you. You find an inherent value in it, irrespective of whether this is a fully developed, quote unquote, or it's someone who has a disability, or it's someone who has some other problem. Either that human being has a value because it's a human being, or it doesn't. And obviously, if you accept abortion, then you're saying that there are at least circumstances where a human being's value could be negated. And once you've accepted that, then it follows that you get into infanticide, you get into, as you said, euthanasia, and all these other things. I think that's an effective argument that I make all the time, and I think it's a good argument to make. To say, hey, well, if you accept abortion, then you have to accept all these other terrible things. I'm also afraid now. I've gotten to the point where I'm afraid of making that argument, because I think we're reaching a point in our society where pro-choicers are going to start saying,
okay,
you're right.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And that was one of the things I sort of cut my teeth on Francis Schaeffer. And in the 1970s and 80s, when I would speak in college classrooms and we were speaking on issues like abortion and whatever, we would, use this idea that Francis Schaeffer talks about of showing the logical absurdity of your viewpoint. He called it taking the roof off. If you take the roof off, the rain falls in, and you realize that we need to repair the roof. And the same kind of idea here is look where this leads. And as you've pointed out, with the complete degradation of morals in society, when you say, well, this could lead to this and this could lead to that, sometimes you have students in the classroom going, okay, I'm good with that, and it looks like something that is out of The Giver or a variety of other dystopias. So it's, as I agree with you, it's sometimes an argument you don't want to use every time. Let me get back to one of your pieces, because you did say at one point, and I think it was really powerful, that the documentary about late-term abortion really contained very little information about late-term abortion. Now, I'll warn some of our listeners here, we might get graphic a little bit here, but I just think we have become so jaded in society, we fail to understand how graphic and how horrific abortion is, especially late-term abortion. Can you explain some of that?
Yeah, well, it is horrific, and I think at least most pro-lifers who are active to some extent are basically aware of how these procedures are done. And I was basically aware, but I thought, well, if I'm going to write something about it, I should do a little more research. And it was, of course, horrible and just images I wish I could get out of my head. But I do think that if you're going to have a documentary about late-term abortion, and as they do in this documentary, they get a lot into the lives and the biographies of these abortion doctors. Well, how about telling us a little bit about what they're actually doing? And I'm not saying that you show it on camera, although maybe there would be some value in that, but at least explain what they're doing. And they don't do very much of that, although I do think they talk about how George Tiller pioneered this method where he injects a poison into the fetus, the quote unquote fetus, the baby, and causes the baby to have a heart attack. And we're told that Of course, there are other methods that they use that are much more graphic, but even that's supposed to be the more acceptable, humane method, and we're told that it's painless. But you talk to anyone who's had a massive heart attack and survived, and I never have, but anyone who has, I doubt they'll say that it's painless. I think it's a terrifying and painful experience, and that's the most humane method that they use, and even that is horrific to think about.
And I think you've done a good job in the piece describing that, and I would really encourage some of our pro-life listeners out there to take the time to read it, because, as you say, it takes you through what they think is the most humane way to actually abort a child in the third trimester, and that is to basically inject something that is oftentimes used for treating people with heart disease. It's used instead in an inappropriate way to create this massive heart attack in the baby so that then the doctor can remove that baby. And so it's a good example of, even when they're trying to do a documentary or an expose, they leave a lot out. And I think if the average American understood what takes place in abortion clinics on a regular day, and there was even a little more information out in the press about Kermit Gosnell and others like that, there would be no difficulty at all in passing more pro-life legislation in all of the state legislatures. And so it is maybe the steadfast attempt on the part of the mainstream media not to tell the story that really is perhaps as big a concern and maybe even scandal as the PBS program that, again, each one of us paid for a little bit with some of our tax dollars. But just before we go, I know that some people would like, if they are in the area, to have a chance to meet you. So let's talk for just a minute, because I know you're going to be in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and you're going to be in the Houston area. So for our listeners there, if they wanted to come out and meet you, how can they find out a little bit more?
Yeah, we're doing some live events and just a chance. So that meets people that read the blog, but also talk a little bit about some of these issues that I discuss in the blog, have a bit of a discussion portion of things. And so it's been a lot of fun so far. It'll be, you said Fort Worth, September 19th, and Houston on September 20th. You can go to sycamoretreeevents.com. It's sycamoretreeevents.com, and all the information is there.
And again, I might just mention that on your website, you have one for Get Your Tickets there, as well as I love your latest blog. Sorry, but it's your fault if you're offended all the time, as well as some other comments about everything from Joel Osteen to certainly some of the various nude photos and just a variety of other things that are out there, the gay lobby. So you really take on almost all sorts of issues, as I do with my commentary. And so I did want to let people know about Matt Walsh. And if you would like to follow the blog, we have the link to Matt Walsh. If you'd like to read the blog post on the PBS special, it is the first article in our articles section there on Point of View. So Matt, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks a lot, Kerby. It's been great.
We will come back and take some more of your phone calls. I suspect some of you are going to have some comments about the issue of abortion. Perhaps some of you saw the PBS documentary and want to comment on that. We will certainly take your phone calls. A little bit later, I'm going to get into this issue of what are we going to do as the president now tells us that Ebola is spinning out of control. And in the second hour today, we're going to be talking with Alison Howard. She is with Concerned Women for America, the communications director. And we're going to be talking about something we mentioned just briefly yesterday when we had in studio Dr. Merrill Matthews, and that is the Government Accountability Office, which is really an independent watchdog agency, has released a new report saying that even though we were promised that our tax dollars would not go to abortion, they are. That even in states that have excluded abortion from their exchanges, really we are being forced to subsidize abortion. So we're going to go into what the claim was made by the president back in September of 2009, what the pro-life Democrats, what were at that time called kind of the blue dog Democrats, demanded from the president, and the complex way in which it was funded so that this would be prevented, and how even with all of those promises and all of the rhetoric and all of the executive orders and all of the legislative language, we're still paying for abortion. So we're going to talk about that. And when we come back, we're going to take some more of your phone calls. If you'd like to join our conversation today, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention that we encouraged you last night to go to our Facebook page and to watch our new video. If you receive an email from me, you probably have received it by now, just alerting you to that and encouraging you to watch it, and most importantly, to maybe hit that share button and put it on your Facebook page, maybe as I've done, or put it, maybe send it by a blog, or to share it with a millennial that you know. Because as we've said, every Tuesday we're going to release a new video, which are in many cases information we've made available here on Point of View, but putting it in a video context so that it will reach people that don't listen to radio. Many of you said before, I appreciate what you do, Kerby, but a lot of people don't listen to Point of View. I got that. Especially the younger you are, the less likely you are to listen to radio. So this is another way to get that same information out in another format and to make a difference. And as those of you have been supporting us financially, you are supporting not only the radio ministry, but the full media ministry as well. Let's take a break. I suspect many of you still have some comments about this PBS special on late-term abortion. If you'd like to join us, that number, 1-800-351-1212. 1-800-351-1212.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office B, Dallas, Texas 752. Free number 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Been talking about in the first half hour with Matt Walsh, who's gone on. But if you would like to join our conversation, we will take your phone calls. A lot of the conversation, I suspect, will be about this PBS special that essentially was a 90-minute pro-abortion, pro-late-term abortion propaganda piece. And we pay for it with our tax dollars. I'll admit it's only $40 million, and that is a rounding error when you talk about the amount that the government spends. But I'm offended by that when it goes to this. I'm offended even more so when 10 times that amount, almost, what is it, $500 million, $500 million of our tax dollars. Money's fungible. If you can fund one part of Planned Parenthood, it frees up money in another area so that they can produce even more abortion. So those are some concerns, and maybe you have some like that or others that you want to bring to the table. So let's go back to the phones and take some of your phone calls. Jamie in South Carolina on the Good News Network. What would you like to share with us today?
Hey, Kerby, how you doing?
I'm good.
Kerby, this stuff is getting bad. It's like abortionist to me is like a predator. Like a great white shark. They just go in and tear off limbs and bloody the water up. But on Nature and Nova, they show these graphic shark scenes. But why don't they just show what the abortionists really do?
I know, what is so funny is the mainstream media said we could not show those pictures of the product of an abortion because that would be so graphic. And I'm going, really? The ones that show blood splatters on CSI programs and show all sorts of graphic images and on social media show these beheadings and all sorts of things, but they can't talk about that. And even as Matt said just a minute ago, they can't even explain what they do, even if they don't show it. There is a conspiracy of silence, and I'm offended as well by the mainstream media, and in this case by PBS, for doing what's basically a 90-minute propaganda piece and even telling the story.
Yeah, it's the same way with our congressmen and senators. Why don't they, come in and do something? It's like when the U.S., like Russia does something bad, we put sanctions on them. Why can't we put sanctions on our senators and governors and some of these other people like that?
Well, you're in South Carolina. You have an opportunity in this particular election cycle to express your opinion at the ballot box, and I hope that you will do so. And more importantly, even after you've elected them, or even before you've elected them, some are supposed to be coming home again for another one of those town hall meetings. I think we need to let them know what we think about some of these issues, and this is one more I wanted to put on the table. I suspect most of you did not know about the PBS special. Diane Edmondson's a good friend of ours, and she, I think just days before it happened, alerted some of us. She's been a very stalwart pro-life leader for many years, and she was just finding out about it. So, it caught a fair amount of us off guard. I just ignored it, hoping it wouldn't get much play. But when Matt Walsh was willing to write about that, I thought, okay, well, let's get him on. And you will see that I think he's done a very good job. 6 key points that take on the issue. And if you wanted to use those to contact your member of Congress or to post on your Facebook page or to send as an email to somebody that you're having a discussion with, I think you will find it very helpful. And as we try to do so often, we educate you about some of the stories that aren't getting a lot of press in the mainstream, and that's certainly going to be our second hour conversation. The GAO report saying that even though we think we are not funding abortion, we are with our subsidies, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But let's take some more of your phone calls. So we'll move from South Carolina to Louisiana this time, KPAE. Ricky, what would you like to share with us today?
Yes, we never going to win the war on killing of little babies until we get our terminology right. I want to commend Matt Walsh for actually telling it like it is. Killing of little babies, abortion is a nice little cute sugar-coated name for what is actually premeditated murder in the first degree. If more Christians would call the killing of babies, not abortion, what the left wants us to call it, but to call it for what it is, premeditated murder in the first degree, then we'll start making some headway. But 99% of all pro-life Christians are afraid to use the term murder of little babies, and that's exactly what it is. It's murdering little babies. And they want to use the progressive liberal terminology, which desensitizes the general public, oh, abortion, no big deal. We've been doing it since 1970. Oh, murder? Oh, yeah, we know murder's wrong. We need to call for what it is. And one other comment, a couple of years ago, I was on your radio program, and I was talking about there's no such thing as a pro-life Democrat. We got an argument. Of course, you cut me off, which I understand. I mean, it's your radio program. But less than 6 months later, the entire Senate and House Republican, every single Democrat, Senator and Republican voted for Obamacare, which they all knew contained murdering of little babies. So I just want to state the point. There's no such thing as a pro-life Democrat. If you are a Democrat, you're gonna support your party, which is the main platform, plank in the platform is murdering little babies. Thank you, Kerby. Appreciate you taking my call. I'm going to listen off here.
Sure. Well, and I didn't cut you off there because really the point I was just trying to make back then, and I'll still make it again here, is, I just don't like to paint with a broad brush. I have run into some that are Democrats who have a pro-life conviction, but here I think you have evidence to support your position. Those few pro-life Democrats, the so-called blue dog Democrats, who made it such a big point that they were not going to vote for the Affordable Care Act until they had some assurance from the president that indeed this money would not go to abortion. And so that's why we have this very complex, it really is a very complex situation where you really have to pay two different amounts so that technically we don't. The GAO report recognizes that it is just a accounting fiction, is probably a nice way to put it. And so I will recognize that there are some people that have been in the Democratic Party for years and are pro-life and disagree with the stated stand of their party. But nevertheless, appreciate your comment. And I think whether they were genuinely pro-life or not, the reality is it has not made any difference. But I'll kind of let you wait to hear all the justification for that until our second hour interview that we're going to do with Alison Howard with Concerned Women for America. Just before we take another break, though, let's go to New Hampshire this time. WSEW. Deborah, thank you for calling today.
Hi, Kerby. It occurred to me while I was listening to you, I worked at a center that was to help women not choose abortion, pro-life. And recently I was praying over the news that I got on the internet about ISIS beheading children. And we were all just horrified and just, trying to pray very hardly for coverage for them. And then all of a sudden I hear this and I'm thinking, what is the difference between them and what we're doing? We are shoving scissors into the back of these poor babies' heads and beheading them, in that way. And how hypocritical can we be to do that to our own, and yet, and I'm nowhere in support of ISIS, of course. They're horrible. But I'm saying step back,
right,
and look at our own house.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think your point is well taken. I've talked about this before. We cover front page anything where maybe a dozen people are killed or a plane goes down, and all of that deserves a great deal of attention. But there is a Holocaust that takes place every single day in abortion clinics, and we're all told to not only not think about it, but to feel like that was a good thing. And as you say, we are spending all sorts of time, energy, and resources, and maybe even deploying troops, certainly deploying aircraft, to deal with ISIS because they behead individuals. And yet in our clinics, if you assume that indeed a baby inside the womb has the same moral status as one outside the womb, and I do, especially with these third trimester abortions, I don't think you're going to have too much disagreement on the part of most Americans, then we're doing the same thing here and turning a blind eye to it. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And also, let me just say, I appreciate you serving in a pregnancy resource center, a crisis pregnancy center. This is, I think, the front lines of the pro-life movement, and we certainly owe all of you that serve in the pregnancy resource centers and the crisis pregnancy centers with CareNet and all sorts of different groups a debt of gratitude, because you are taking women who are convinced that the only answer to their so-called problem pregnancy is abortion, and you are giving them an alternative. So I certainly salute you. I've spoken at lots of your banquets and certainly want to encourage all of our listeners to support their local pregnancy resource center, and I appreciate you being involved in that very important movement. Let's take a break. When we come back, I'll take a few more phone calls. We've stayed on this issue of abortion a little bit longer, and that's all appropriate because it's a good setup for what we'll be talking about in the second hour today on this new report from the government that says really, we are basically funding abortion through Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And for a few more minutes, 1-800-351-1212. What started the conversation was our conversation with Matt Walsh talking about the PBS special called After Tiller and really trying to humanize the life of abortionists, especially those who are late-term abortionists. By the way, I might just mention that George Tiller actually killed, murdered, whatever phrase you want to use, 60,000 babies inside the womb. And they are using this to humanize it because, of course, he was killed. And then they talk about the others who fear for their lives. How true that is, I don't know. But the bottom line is they wouldn't if they weren't engaged in this gruesome practice. That does not justify any kind of violence towards an abortionist. But nevertheless, I think you can understand why many people are outraged. Number one, because 40 million of our tax dollars goes to PBS to do this 90-minute special. About $500 million goes to Planned Parenthood so that they can do abortions. And all of this to try to humanize those people who are engaged in a practice which, as Deborah mentioned a minute ago, reminds us of some of the graphic images we've seen in our social media. But if you agree or disagree, we'll give you that opportunity. The program is called Point of View. Let's take some more points of view, and we'll go to Georgia and talk to Tony.
I appreciate you taking my call, Kerby, once again. But here's again, like one of your second to the last caller mentioned about, how we allow them to label things. And like he said, murder. Instead of just like us calling a politician, we keep calling the politicians, and that gives them the permission to continue to lie to us. Because we don't really call them out and call them sinners and liars that they are. So it's like a free pass. And the president is renowned for this free ticket and free pass that we tend to give them. And they continue on with what we are allowing them to do, instead of us being able to get ahead of them.
I have always had problems with, for example, the Associated Press style manual that says you call people that are pro-life anti-abortion. Okay, well, if you call them anti-abortion, then can you not call the others pro-abortion? No, they're called pro-choice. You can see the bias in the style manual. You've got to call people that believe in abortion pro-choice, but you can't call people that are pro-life pro-life. So you call them anti-abortion and pro-choice. And that right off the bat, you can see that every secular media organization, by the definition of the style manual, already has a tilt towards abortion. That's before you even then go into the newsrooms and find out the bias that they actually have there. So, Tony, you're right on target. We need to call things what they are, and I appreciate you giving us a call today. Call back again.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's since we're on that topic, let's stay in Georgia for just a minute. Jacob, I think you want to say something similar to what we've just said, so I'll stay on your topic. What would you like to share with us today?
Yeah, I'm saying amen and amen to the caller before about naming it what it is, murder, premeditated murder. And when he made the statement that the majority of the Democrats are not pro-life, I say amen to that too. And one of my major concerns is that in the black churches, the majority of black pastors and preachers and evangelists are Democrats, and they support the president in whatever he does. And also, the majority of the abortions that are done by Planned Parenthood are to the black group.
Yeah, black and Hispanic, a high percentage, a disproportionate number of abortions take place in the black and Hispanic communities. And many of the largest abortion clinics are located in those communities, as we talked about just with Stephan Roden the other day, and as we've talked with some others about two of the largest abortion clinics, for example, in the state of Texas, are within walking distance of a lot of the black churches and certainly in black and Hispanic communities.
Yeah. And it's just like when they vote, Romans 1:32 said not only the one that commit these acts are guilty of murder or worthy of being killed, but the ones that vote for them or support them. And I think this is what people got to look at, is that if you're voting for people who believe in murdering babies, then you are as guilty as the one who are doing it.
Yep. I was speaking in a black church last couple of weeks, and that was one of the questions came from the audience on an index card. And after we talked about abortion, and as we talked about a pro-life vigil as I was driving out, I noticed the bumper sticker on one of the cars, and it was for the individual running for governor in the state of Texas, who is just an outstanding pro-abortion candidate, one that was involved in the filibuster and all the others. And so I thought, where's the disconnect here? I mean, we've been talking about abortion. We've been talking about the need to vote rightly. And then I look at the bumper stickers and I go, that tells me a lot. I mean, sometimes people don't make the connection. So, Jacob, let's hope that they do, because there is a lot at stake in this election and the next couple of elections. And I would encourage people to cast their pro-life vote in the voting booth. So appreciate you joining us today. Let's real quickly just try to take one more phone call. We'll head up to Rhode Island this time, WARV in Rhode Island. Raymond, what would you share with our audience today?
Hi, on September 5th, the famous pro-life group Live Action published an email entitled 5 Things You Won't Learn from, quote-unquote, After Tiller. And it's so explosive and so, well, I don't know the word for it. It's just so graphic that I'm not sure if I could discuss it over the radio.
But maybe we could put that link up. That's a good idea, because I know that I want to be careful, because I know we sometimes have listening ears out there. And but first of all, I would think we deserve to really get some more information from our friends at Live Action, because they're doing such a great job of addressing some of those issues. And we're going to have some of them in studio here pretty soon to actually talk about some of those issues. But so you found it helpful of the 90-minute pro documentary by PBS?
I had to stop breathing. That's how explosive it is.
Well, we are going to try to have Lila Rose in studio here pretty soon. She, of course, is the founder of Live Action. And what we could do is, we do have a couple of articles already on the website, but I'll tell you, you've given me the impetus to maybe see if we could post it on our Facebook page or something like that, because after all, I think Matt Walsh did a pretty good job with his piece on PBS and abortion. Dear PBS, I don't think there's a compassionate way to murder infants. And he did go into, in some detail, what they left out. But I know Lila Rose probably has a little bit more. So I appreciate you pointing us to that. And anybody with a computer and Google search can find it right now. But I'll tell you, we'll see if we can find it and put it up there and let people read it. But pretty horrific stuff, isn't it?
It's horrific.
Yeah. Well, we need to tell the truth, but I also want to be a good steward of the airwaves and recognize that we don't want to get too graphic. We have enough of that going on in the media, and after all, we have lots and lots of Christian radio stations and even some secular stations that carry this program, so we'll be careful about that. But I'll guarantee if you read it, you probably don't want to eat lunch afterwards or dinner, because you will be so upset by what was left out of that particular PBS special. So thank all for calling. And if you want to continue this conversation, we will stay on the issue of abortion a little bit longer, because after the break, we're going to come back with Alison Howard. She is a communication director for Concerned Women for America. And we mentioned this yesterday with Dr. Merrill Matthews, but we have a little more information now. The Government Accountability Office, which is really an independent watchdog agency, released a report outlining abortion coverage in the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare. And the report found that all Americans, even in states that have excluded abortion from their exchanges, are being forced to subsidize these services. That was not supposed to happen. I will give you the direct quote from what the president promised, the executive orders that supposedly prevented this, the rather Byzantine and complex way we even collect the funds so that theoretically this complex payment scheme would prevent this, and it didn't happen. I know you're really surprised. I'm being facetious. And of course, we knew that this would be the case. This is one of the reasons why during the debate on the Affordable Care Act, you never had Planned Parenthood come before Congress. You never had the National Abortion Rights League come before Congress and say, you need to fund abortion. And we know what was happening. Behind the scenes, there was kind of a nod and a wink saying, we're going to fund abortion. We'll take care of you. Don't worry about that. So if you'd like to know a little bit more, we have lots of information about that on our website, pointofview.net. As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, we also sent out an email encouraging you to go to our Facebook page and watch the newest video that is out. Let's take a break. We'll come back and talk more about this GAO report, and we'll take some more phone calls right after this.
Across the nation, this is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, we come back to the issue of abortion. In the first hour, you might remember we did spend a little bit of time talking with Matt Walsh about that PBS special that was sort of a 90-minute piece that was really sort of a propaganda piece for late-term abortion called After Tiller. And one of the callers, you might remember, Jacob, called in and talked about that. And I guess Raymond did as well. So we had a couple that mentioned this. And so one of the things I wanted to do is tell you that we've already posted on our Point of View Facebook page the piece from Life Action League. And we have some of the information that you can find on Live Action. And so you're going to find a couple of things. Well, one, After Tiller highlights the horror and moral confusion of late-term abortion. So that is already up there. You can find a couple of other links that will help you, including, of course, the ones we've posted on the first hour, and then went into some other topics. And now in the second hour, we want to continue that for a few more minutes, because as we mentioned yesterday briefly when we had Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio, the Government Accountability Office, which is an independent watchdog agency, issued a new report outlining that indeed, even in states where we think we've excluded abortion from the exchanges, nevertheless, we're forced to subsidize this. This very complex, almost Byzantine payment scheme was invented in large part by the so-called blue dog Democrats, the pro-life Democrats in Congress, so that they would pass Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, and yet now we find that is not taking place. So to give us a little better understanding of that, we have information, first of all, about Concerned Women for America. We have this particular press release that was issued, and this comes from Alison Howard. She is the communications director for Concerned Women for America. She's been involved in all sorts of different activities, including the National March for Marriage. She has been on lots of different programs. She has a bachelor's degree in communications from Liberty University, where she also was the founding member of Young Women for America. She has served until fairly recently as the executive assistant to Penny Nance at Concerned Women for America, now is the communications director. She's been an intern in the past at Fox News and also as a sports reporter. Allison, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks so much for having me, Kerby. It's my first time. I appreciate it.
Well, we're going to have you on a lot more. I've already kind of watched your career, and you're one of those rising stars, so it's a privilege to have you on the program with us. And this piece that came out the other day by you is a little bit detailed, but let's explain that, because the assurance that we received from the very beginning, whether it was from the president, whether it was from some of the Democrats in Congress, is, oh, no, we're not going to fund abortion. The Government Accountability Office, the GAO, says, oh, yes, we are. Explain.
Well, it's important to note that the Government Accountability Office is an independent agency here. They step in to look at laws, and this is what they found in Obamacare, that at least 1,000 plans cover abortion for any reason on demand with taxpayer funds, which, if you remember, was a promise of the president that would not happen. His monumental piece of health care legislation was signed into law in April 2010 because of his 11th hour promise that taxpayer funds would not be used for abortion. And yet again, we're just disappointed here. People of faith, people of conviction and moral character who oppose abortion and the taxpayer funding of it are now finding out that within the exchanges, certain states even cover it up to without any restrictions, I should say. And really, I think what we have before us in the media is a focus on Ray Rice, on the NFL, on child abuse, which should be a focus of any child being abused. But now we know that millions of abortions are being funded by the taxpayer, which is something that we in this country are opposed to, a majority of people are against, and we really should be able to have that ability of freedom of conscience here. And so we just want to point out the House has already passed the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. It sits in the Senate, so we're calling on Senator Reid and the President to rectify this broken promise.
Well, again, there's a couple of things we could do, and that's the first action item, and we're real big about action items here, so we may even produce it later in the week, and we owe a debt of gratitude to you because we already have, as you said, the House passed the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. So now I'm going to see what we can do to encourage our listeners to contact their two senators, and I recognize some of our listeners live in states where the senators won't pass it, but we only need a majority. And then there are Chris Smith and others that have dealt with the other issue, and that is the GAO also found out that even when Americans tried to determine whether abortion coverage was included in their plan, that information was not readily available. So his legislation would try to provide transparency. And if I remember right, Allison, didn't this administration come in talking about transparency?
They sure did. They said they'd be the most transparent administration, and yet they've been the most confusing. I think the GAO report really made clear, and people are saying all across the board today, we deserve to know from our providers what our insurance plans cover and what we're paying for. And if we are being forced to pay for abortions under the guise of health care, not only do some people oppose it morally, but some people just will not be using that service and therefore don't need to be paying for it. To make clear to your listeners here, what happens is the president promised that that we wouldn't have to fund abortions through his new health care law by saying that there would be a separate payment for any abortion coverage, which we now see is just a gimmick. It's being ignored because they haven't made it happen. But essentially, you'd have to write two checks. Any kind of subsidy you receive from the government, which is taxpayer money, would not be able to be used for abortion coverage. According to government figures, Kerby, 87% of people who bought a plan on the healthcare exchange did so with at least some sort of subsidy. So the fact that that's happening now and there is nothing set up to protect taxpayer dollars from funding abortion really just goes to show that this has been broken from the beginning. American people deserve to know what's in their plans and deserve to know what they're paying for, and that it doesn't go against their moral and religious convictions. So Concerned Women for America and others predicted this when Obamacare was passed, and now we know that federal taxpayers in all 50 states are footing the bill.
Let me take you back to 5 years ago, and where a joint session of Congress, September 2009, President Obama unequivocally said that under the health care plan, quote, no federal dollars will be used to fund abortions, and federal conscience laws will remain in place, unquote. Mm-hmm. Of course, as you point out, now we know that more than 1,036 plans cover abortion, and the so-called surcharge for abortion coverage is simply an accounting gimmick. So I appreciate you bringing this up. What action items are you recommending? We are going to certainly encourage our listeners to contact our two senators and really address this issue with the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. Are there some other things that our listeners can do?
Well, absolutely. Thanks so much. If you go onto concernedwomen.org, you can find a list of your senators, your congressmen. Also, you can find their Twitter handles, and we found that to even be effective to say, hey, listen, we're paying attention, even if mainstream media is not. And so call your senators and encourage them to bring to the floor the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. Let them know that you're not okay with this, and that it should break our hearts that in this country, in this day and age, with the science and technology we have to know what's happening in utero, that the president has continued to push for abortion on demand at any time with taxpayer funds. And so we'll keep fighting hard. Thank you guys for what you're doing in shining light in the darkness on some of these very important things that come out of Washington, D.C. So we can't thank you enough.
Alison Howard with us, and again, Concerned Women for America, CWFA.org. Alison, thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
Thanks. God bless.
We'll be right back.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Alex McFarland made an attention-getting statement the other day. He said that if today were 1776, there would be no America. His reason was simple. Back in 1776, the Founding Fathers believed in natural law. Today, our leaders do not. Alex McFarland illustrates this by talking about abortion and the pro-life perspective that is missing from our national debate. He says the defense of life is a defense of the Constitution, and those who are afraid to stand for life and for absolute morality are putting our nation at risk. We can add other examples. The only way judges and legislatures can accept the notion of same-sex marriage is to reject the concept of natural law. The marriage laws in states were written by people who understand the importance of traditional marriage and the public purpose that definition has in society. The conflict we have today over various threats to religious liberty also go back to rejection of natural law. The framers of the Constitution understood the importance of such principles as freedom of conscience and freedom of association. Alex McFarland understands how natural law is important to our liberty. He says a society that recognizes natural law, as our Judeo-Christian society has long done, is a society that also maximizes liberty for individuals, unquote. He went on to explain that if someone wishes to practice homosexuality, go ahead, but don't tear down the framework that gives you the freedom to be gay. Without a natural law or biblical framework, the freedom we enjoy today will be lost. Alex McFarland talks about the iron fist of statism, or the iron fist of Sharia. We are beginning to see how statist views result in persecution of Christian businesses like Hobby Lobby and Chick-fil-A. And we're seeing how Sharia law in other countries results in the persecution of churches and Christians in general. We should be grateful that America began at a time when its leaders believed in natural law, and we should be concerned that so many of our leaders today no longer believe in it. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Last hour plus, we've been talking about abortion, and if you would like to join our conversation, you can still give us a phone call, 1-800-351-1212. But I'm going to move on to some other topics that certainly are front and center, and one of those, a very big topic over the last couple of days with the administration, has to do with how we deal with Ebola. And so one of the articles we've posted, Ebola spiraling out of control, and we have some other pieces that I'm going to read from real quickly to get us up to speed on what is going to be taking place, because the president now has committed 3,000 troops to go to West Africa. There are all sorts of questions about whether or not these individuals will be safe, whether or not any of them become infected and they come back to this country. This is a deadly virus, and it's a sneaky one, or it's a subtle one, whatever phrase you want to use when you're talking about a virus. But it, in some respects, reminds me of malaria that sort of hides in your body for a while. So does Ebola. And sometimes individuals have an infection and they don't manifest symptoms right away. And then even after they're, quote, cured, sometimes the virus stays in various body fluids. We won't get into all the details of that today. But the biochemistry of it is fascinating, but also very scary. So we will leave that for another day. But this piece that we have posted here begins with President Barack Obama saying that the deadly Ebola virus is spiraling out of control, and he's called upon the world to follow America's lead and to act quickly in the fight to eradicate it. The author goes on to say, speaking from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta on Tuesday afternoon, President Obama warned that inaction could cause an exponential rise in victims, destabilizing Western African nations and threatening world security. He said it's spiraling out of control, it's getting worse, it's spreading faster and exponentially. And he pointed out that current thousands of victims could grow to thousands to hundreds of thousands without immediate action. and through the chances of Ebola spreading to the United States are low, he nevertheless said it's a potential threat to global security if the economies of these countries break down. And he said it's an epidemic that's not just a threat to regional security, it's a threat to global security. And that's why the president has deployed 3,000 military troops. Now, they're going to coordinate civilian efforts, and they're going to be based primarily in Liberia. And the reason for that, by the way, is because that country asked the United States to help. But we're talking about Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea, which have been the hardest hit. And Obama then went on to say that efforts will include what he calls an air bridge to get health workers and supplies there faster, as well as establishing a staging area in Senegal to help distribute personnel and aid on the ground more quickly. And if you think about the irony of some of this, we seem, if I've been counting right, to actually be deploying more troops to West Africa to deal with Ebola then we're going to deploy any kind of troops to fight ISIS. And, of course, the president's made it very clear he doesn't want boots on the ground in the Middle East, but we're putting a fair number of troops on the ground in West Africa. They'll also create various sites to train thousands of health workers. U.S. aid will also join in a community care campaign to help distribute supplies and information kits so families can better protect themselves. There will also be additional treatment units. And the Pentagon right now is asking Congress to transfer about $500,000 right now to U.S. aid and the CDC to fund the effort. And President Obama went on to say, today the United States is doing even more, but this is a global threat and it demands a truly global response. He went on to say international organizations just have to move faster than they have up until this point. So the question certainly on the table is does this make sense for us to deploy those troops? Number two, are you concerned about this being a possible way in which Ebola could be introduced back into this country? In just a minute, I'm going to quote from Dr. Kent Brantley, who, of course, was the doctor who was infected with Ebola, who was brought back to this country, not the only one since then, and some of the questions and concerns that have been surfaced there. The Wall Street Journal the other day had a piece by Scott Gottlieb and Chevy Troy calling Ebola's warning to an unprepared America. And they write that the world is finally mobilizing to wage a muscular fight against Ebola's catastrophic spread through West Africa. President Obama has put the Pentagon in charge of a robust 30-person U.S. relief effort in the stricken areas. They went on to say that this is a positive step, but the world is still dangerously ill-prepared for the fight against pandemic outbreaks. They go on to say that in the case of Ebola, we were late to the battle and are now focused too narrowly on places like Liberia, while failing to see, they say, that West Africa is one big outbreak. We also remain too dependent upon outdated tools and strategies in fighting the virus and are tethered to an effort not yet scaled to the challenge. While Ebola may still be contained, other potentially calamitous threats are out there. And they talk about MERS, SARS, the avian flu, and other illnesses they believe could reemerge at any time. And they said in the American Midwest, for instance, a novel virus classified as enterovirus 68 has recently sent 300 children to the hospital in respiratory distress. And maybe you've been reading about this or hearing about this in your local news, with no available antiviral therapy or vaccine. They say we need to rethink our preparedness and adopt a more modern approach for dealing with these and other looming outbreaks. If you've watched any of the films that have come out in the last couple of years talking about the need for emergency preparedness, you recognize that there is a lot more we need to do. And given the mobility of Americans and most people in the Western world generally, a virus does not stay on one continent. We are not protected from a virus because we're across an ocean from Africa. We're certainly not protected from a virus in the United States. And so as a result, there is a tremendous need for us to understand some of the dangers. Well, these two authors go on to say that the failure thus far to confront and fight Ebola comes from the shortfalls in three areas. Number one, gauging the true scope of the outbreak. Number two, deploying therapeutics to effectively combat the virus. And number three, delivering medical equipment and personnel. Fixing these limitations should be the priority in dealing with this epidemic and the next one. So they have a couple of points. First, on detection, fighting deadly diseases requires early detection and a clear understanding of the magnitude of an evolving threat. In West Africa, we dramatically and drastically underestimated the timing and scope of Ebola's transmission and still can't accurately measure the magnitude of its spread. Ebola is not the only modern instance of the world coming up short. They talk about the 2009 H1N1 influenza outbreak, where health organizations were slow to detect the emergence of a problem in Mexico. And even after press reports that Mexico was experiencing a late flu season, public health officials failed to grasp the novel infection was coursing through that country and would soon arrive in the United States. They go on to talk about some other things, but their second point is on therapeutics. That is, in 2004, Congress passed the Project BioShield to finance the development and stockpiling of medical countermeasures against the likely agents of would-be bioterrorists. Nobody's arguing right now that Ebola is a terrorist act, but you can recognize that this is also another reason to pay attention to things like Ebola. How do we deal with a natural outbreak? What could we and what should we do and be prepared for any kind of bioterrorism? And so, again, that is another very important issue that they raise in this article. And the third is what they call logistics. The World Health Organization's failed response to the Ebola crisis shows anew that the group is more a politically minded policy-making body than a relief agency. The World Health Organization's claim that it lacked the resources to respond to Ebola while the outbreak was spiraling out of control in West Africa. The organization had plenty of time and money to mount an international campaign to combat what it flagged last month as a grave concern. But again, their grave concern was not Ebola. What was their grave concern? Electronic cigarettes, which shows you the lack of priorities in things like the World Health Organization. One last comment, Dr. Kent Brantley, who is, of course, has been the medical director for Samaritan's Purse at their Ebola Care Center in Monrovia, Liberia, testified yesterday in front of Congress. He was actually testifying in front of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Labor, Health, and Human Services. And this is where he said, I came to understand firsthand what my patients had suffered. He made, of course, a full recovery, but at the same time talked about how dangerous Ebola is and recalled some of the horror of contracting Ebola and also expressing his concern that we need to do a lot more, and talked about some of the steps that have been taken so far, one, of course, which is to actually deploy 3,000 troops to West Africa to deal with Ebola. Let's take a break, but I'd love to get your comments on this World Health Challenge, and one in which the president has decided to actually deploy 3,000 military troops to West Africa. What are your thoughts about that? 1-800-351-1212. We'll have a few other comments to make about that, and then we've got quite a few other stories to cover as well. And don't forget that today is Constitution Day, so at the very end, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the history of the Constitution and the influence of Alexander Hamilton. That comes from our good friends at Wall Builders. We'll talk about that and give you a chance to join in that conversation as well. But let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll take a few of your phone calls if you'd like to join us on this subject of Ebola. 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break. Get your phone calls right after these important messages.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, Ebola is our topic on the table. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. This is a virus that is spread by blood or blood products. The argument is that it's not spread through the air, but aerosols could be a way that it is spread. We also, of course, know that it is spread by fruit bats and others, but primarily it is a person-to-person contact. An individual may be, for a short period of time, asymptomatic, and then when they have the symptoms, it takes a while for them to actually get a positive reading on the virus, so that means that sometimes it can be spread fairly easily. Even after they are cured, we know that the virus will stay, for example, in men, in the semen for up to 2 months. So that's a concern as well in terms of other transmission. And, of course, once an individual comes down with it, they begin to bleed both internally and externally. It's a hemorrhagic kind of disease, so those are just a couple of issues we can put on the table that we need to think about as the president is now deploying 3,000 troops to West Africa to address this issue, and the decision has been made from time to time to bring some of those individuals who are infected with Ebola back to this country. Your thoughts about some of the things that we've put on the table today? 1-800-351-1212. We'll go to Missouri first, KNEO. Eric, what would you like to share?
Well, Kerby, I'd like to look at the issue of Ebola and in light of the issue of malaria, which you mentioned earlier, and just look back historically at what had happened with reference to malaria. As Mark Levin, in a brilliant piece that he did some months ago, stated, we had virtually stamped out malaria in many, many countries.
Yes.
And then, though, Rachel Carson writes, Silent Spring, and it's demonized. They have hearings about it, and they produce not one single shred of evidence to state that DDT, which of course was demonized, caused any environmental problems or health problems and so forth. But the director, the head of the EPA, based on politics, based on his anti-population growth agenda, outlawed DDT. Here's the point. We could say, and by the way, millions and maybe, 500 million or more lives, former luminaries have stated, were saved because of DDT. They call it a miracle chemical, Kerby. Yes. Inexpensive, highly effective, and non-toxic for the most part. But guess what, Kerby? It's been millions of lives every year lost due to malaria, when the answer is right there at our disposal. But guess what? They don't care, Kerby. And so to look at the World Health Organization or any of these groups that are political groups that are supposed to show concern about the health and welfare of citizens around the world, Kerby, I don't trust them for one moment. But if their friends can make money off of the issue, or if they can further their anti-population, remember, Kerby, we were told that by Paul Ehrlich, that the Earth would only sustain 500,000 people, and a lot of people, therefore, need to die. And I really believe, Kerby, that they couldn't care less about saving people from Ebola. But as long as they can empower government and enrich their corporate buddies, they'll do it. Those are my thoughts. What do you think?
Well, I certainly would agree with you on DDT. There's probably very good evidence that maybe there was indiscriminate spraying of DDT, but, I've seen individuals that have poured DDT in water and drank from it to say, this is how dangerous it is, and I remember being in a lab where they had DDT and nobody seemed to be very concerned about it except some of the environmentalists, but the chemists were saying, okay, it is, we have to pay attention to it, but that's not the big issue. And of course, look at all the loss of life because we sometimes don't even provide malaria nets to individuals. But back to your bigger point of Ebola, that is a concern. You mentioned the World Health Organization. I quoted this just a minute ago. It's in the Wall Street Journal from Scott Gottlieb and Tevi Troy. These are two individuals that actually have worked in the area of Food and Drug Administration, Health and Human Services, but nevertheless, they were just appalled that the World Health Organization last month flagged as their grave concern, what was it? Electronic cigarettes, not Ebola. So I think it kind of illustrates the priorities were not where they need to be. But let me take a few more calls because we've got matter of fact, we have almost a full bank of phone calls here. So let's go through as many calls as we can to give you a chance to address this issue of Ebola and the American response through President Obama. So we'll go to South Carolina. William, what would you like to share?
I have two questions for you. In this country, we rely on universal precautions to protect healthcare workers and prevent the spread of disease.
Sure.
And I wonder how we are in the epidemic areas, how well they're supplied with essential disposables, particularly disposable gloves, which are sort of the frontline defense.
Right. And, that's one of the things we learned about from Dr. Kent Brantley, and I'll let you finish. He was the medical director at Samaritan's Purse Ebola Care Center in Monrovia, Liberia. And they looked like they had just enough for his people. And yet, with all the precautions he took, guess what happened? He and then later another doctor and even a nurse came down with Ebola anyway. So that tells you that you can't protect enough. And I know that one of the things the president wants to do is have a staging area to provide a bridge for more of that, because let's just face it, you don't have those kind of resources in West Africa to any degree like we have here in the United States. And even those that had that level of protection, I can at least count 3 of them right off the top of my head that did come down with the Ebola virus anyway. But I'll let you continue.
Yeah, and my second question is more of a concern. We know that Ebola has an animal reservoir in Africa. When we bring infected patients to the United States, I know that all of their waste is handled in an isolation situation and all that, but at some point, some of that waste ends up in the sanitary sewer system. And I wonder if there's any risk to the general population of the United States of developing an animal reservoir here from what goes into our sanitary sewer system.
Let's hope not. As I understand it from Dr. Keith Brantley, because I watched the special where they talked about that, it seemed like they isolated everything in terms of what happened at Emory University. But you raise a very good question, William. The first few, and in particular he being the first one, everybody was taking very good care, and they were making sure that they were going out of their way to have levels of protection. What happens if you bring lots of individuals back, or you bring back some of the 3,000 troops? They're asymptomatic, but then they show up here and they begin to spread it unintentionally. I mean, you've got some good questions, and I think those are questions that definitely deserve an answer from the Centers for Disease Control.
All right. Thank you very much.
We'll appreciate you bringing them up. Let's see if we can go through maybe a few more of these comments or questions. George in Ohio, what would you like to share with us today?
For one thing, I want to say that the guy with the DDT was completely correct. The other thing is, I don't understand is, we used to quarantine people for smallpox and measles. I believe if we quarantine people for AIDS, you wouldn't have AIDS the way it is. But the World Health Organization and our government wants to be too politically correct to do the right thing. They're afraid of the backlash, and they just if you quarantine a country for a while, and they can quarantine different areas in the country, then it would die out. But as long as you keep bringing it over here and moving around, it's going to continue.
I would agree. And I think that's, quarantine, first of all, where does that idea come from? Well, it's actually in the Old Testament. Second of all, there was a time in which quarantine was just standard public health practice. And now today, as you said, political correctness prevents us from doing that, because we don't want people who have a disease to feel bad about themselves. And so we might be willing to risk individuals that would be infected simply because we don't want to quarantine people. Let me take one more phone call before the break, and we'll go to Illinois this time, WPEO in Peoria. Moretta, thank you for calling today.
Thank you. We've had some good comments here. I think, and I agree with them, but one thing that's on my mind is I don't understand how we as a country can so quickly move towards something like this that has not been a priority on our people that are testing and working with medical things. So how do we even know what we're going to present and do when we get there? Do we have the equipment, like the products and the clothes, which has been mentioned? I don't know. It just seems like the whole thing we're so unknown with everything. We don't have our own insurance figured out here. How can we go there? And
well, trust the government. The federal government never makes a mistake. The federal government always is able to implement all of these things carefully, so there should be no concern at all, right?
Exactly. Well, I don't know. Personally, it's all political.
I think it
trying
is.
To make a point. We will be putting ourselves at risk. There's no other way around it. I'm a nurse. I've worked with infectious diseases back in the old days in the 60s and 70s, and I know how we had to work with those. So I just think we're putting ourselves just in harm's way.
Let me put you on hold in case you have another comment. We have one of those mandatory breaks. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We've been talking about the Ebola virus, and we'll do that for another few minutes, and then want to get into Constitution Day. They are perfecting is probably a better word here, and implementing an Ebola virus, and there's some stories coming out right now about being able to perfect that and promote that as best as possible through the general population, so we'll see where that is. But again, at least 5,000 people have been stricken ill in countries in West Africa. At least almost 2,500 of them have died. Many anticipate the figure could reach as much as 20,000. But Marietta, you were mentioning just before we went to the break that you're a nurse. I'd love to get your thoughts because we are dealing with a highly infectious and dangerous virus. And what kind of thoughts do you have in terms of what happens when we send 3,000 troops over there? We deploy more doctors and in some cases even bring Ebola patients back to America. What are your thoughts?
That's exactly the problem, and we don't really even know. We know how it's spread to a point. I don't think we have that totally completed yet as far as it really how it's spread. We have a start on it, but it hasn't been around that long and to this extent. But I really don't see that we need to go in there like gangbusters and act like we're the savior of the world because we're not prepared to do that. I've worked on enough problems to know that you can't change them that quickly, and you can't come up with a program that will meet the needs when we're thinking of all the people that are over there in Africa that already have the disease.
Well, I think your point's well taken. And again, this is a debate that we probably should have somewhere along the line, and whether we should be deploying that many troops to West Africa, more than we're deploying to fight ISIS, tells me something. And so this is a conversation I thought we should have at Point of View, and I'm glad that many of you have joined in the conversation.
I think much of this is just to take our minds off of what's happening at home.
Well, that could be too.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you calling in. Call in again because we appreciate your expertise as a nurse and somebody that's worked in infectious disease control. Let's, if we can, maybe take one more phone call, and then we'll wind down the day as we talk about Constitution Day. But Ken, you'll be the last caller, KVJS, and what would you like to share with us today?
Well, everything that's going on doesn't make sense. And there's a lot of stuff in this administration that doesn't make sense. It makes it look like the president is either a complete imbecile or he has an agenda to fundamentally transform America. And what better way than bringing a third world nation disease and turning us into a third world nation? We may not know it, even in his presidency, like fighting against ISIS. It'll take a while to get the job done. And all this latent stuff that comes back with however many troops we send over there, what better way to do it? And if he, I don't think he's a dunderhead. When he says, oh, man, I'm going to get down to the bottom of this all the time, that's a ruse. And I do think everything fits. If you look at him as a fifth column for Islam, then everything fits. He wants to be on their all-star Muslim of the, eternity award while taking down our country.
Well, I'm not sure how bringing or sending troops to deal with Ebola fits, but okay, nothing to...
Well, I mean, if we turn into a third world nation disease and we can't even handle it, we got our own, how are we going to go over and fight ISIS when we're... Who knows what could happen?
Well, again, if you've seen some of these Hollywood films about outbreaks of different kinds, again, those were all fiction, but if indeed something like that happened in this country... It would affect us in horrible ways. I mean, imagine all of us staying home, afraid to even go to like the grocery store, afraid to go to a mall, afraid to engage in any kind of commerce for fear that we might contract the Ebola virus. So there are some consequences, and that's why I wanted to bring it up today. I just thought it was worthy of our discussion, and you can read one of my articles here on Ebola out of control. Ken, I'll let you make the final point.
Well, again, it's a non-brainer. Why do this now? And as the nurse said just prior to me, we don't even know any of the details. Why not hold on and wait? And this is a hurry up. We got to do it right now.
Oh, we hear that all the time.
When he was elected, when he was elected, hurry up. We got to do this. We got to, take care of the banks. And 2008, the stock. Everything is hurry up and trust us. We're the government. And as you said on the abortion issue, they cannot be trusted on anything. Nothing. And everybody knows that. We knew it when we did not vote for him, not because of the color of his skin, because of the lack of character and the fact that he wants to fundamentally transform America every which way he can. Not fighting our enemies who say they're at war with us, telling us that it's not Islam, and now sending us into a disease area where the chances of very contagion coming back in the name of war from the people who go, you don't send soldiers to fight disease. Since when?
I know that's the part that doesn't match either.
Or there's a plan, a cunning plan behind this, and his Muslim background, it all fits there. But everything else, it looks like some sort of weird, bad nightmare. Anyway.
I appreciate your phone call. Let me, just before we run out of time, mention that today is the 227th anniversary of the signing of the Constitution. Our friends at Wall Builder, David Barton and others, have reminded us that one of those key players was Alexander Hamilton. He was significant in a number of ways. First of all, he was a delegate to the Constitutional Convention in 1787. More importantly, he, John Jay, and James Madison wrote what were called the Federalist Papers, and those were used to really justify and argue for the ratification of the Constitution. He, of course, served as a military aide to General George Washington. He was America's first Secretary of the Treasury, but eventually, as I think all of us know, he was killed in a duel with Aaron Burr. The story is kind of complex, but I think I can put it together pretty quickly. That is, the election of 1800, Hamilton worked against the re-election of the incumbent President John Adams, and when Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson tied in the vote for president, as required by the Constitution, the contest was sent, it was the only time that happened, to the House of Representatives for them to choose a winner, and Hamilton supported Jefferson over Aaron Burr. Later, of course, was killed in that duel. But nevertheless, in 1802, Alexander Hamilton urged the formation of a Christian constitutional society who had the twofold goal as, first, the support of the Christian religion, and second, the support of the Constitution of the United States. Again, when you hear so often people talking about the fact that, well, most of the founders and framers weren't really Christian, one of those, Alexander Hamilton, who wasn't necessarily known as being that much of an outstanding Christian, nevertheless was the one that urged the formation of a Christian constitutional society. And he even actually openly declared that, for my part, I sincerely esteem it, that is, the Constitution, as a system without which the finger of God never could have suggested and agreed upon such a diversity of interests. And, of course, his dream of a Christian constitutional society never came to pass because, of course, in 1804, he was shot down in a duel with Aaron Burr. I've suggested that it would have been possible if he had not been killed, essentially assassinated, because he did not even shoot at Aaron Burr, that he might have been president. Others have argued against that because, after all, Alexander Hamilton was actually born in the Caribbean, and as we know, you would never be allowed to elect a president who was not born in the United States of America. So I'm just having a little fun with that. But nevertheless, on this particular day in which we are talking about the 227th anniversary of the signing of the Constitution, this is Constitution Day, and I would encourage you maybe to take a moment and at least read one of the articles of the U.S. Constitution. It's something you could do today as a good citizen and certainly as a Christian who would want to understand those principles that have kept us strong all of these years. And I would encourage some of our members in Congress, this would be a good day for them to read the Constitution, then to believe the Constitution, and then to begin to act on the Constitution. Well, that's all I have for today. But I hope that you appreciated the conversations we've had today on everything from abortion to Ebola and much more. And we will continue our conversations tomorrow. And if you'd like to join the discussion at any point, feel free to give us a call. That number, of course, is 1-800-351-1212. We're going to have Scotty Neal Hughes in with her new book. Carolyn Hayes will be in studio talking again about some of the problems that people have had in trying to even get claims filed first with insurance companies, now through Obamacare. So there'll be lots that we'll be talking about this week, and I hope that you'll join us every single day here on Point of View. One last time, if you have received the email, we're reminding you to go to the Point of View Facebook page and watch the video. That's just a great opportunity for you to then maybe watch it, hit that share button, and put it on your Facebook page or send it on to someone else. Let me encourage you to visit the website, pointofview.net, and the Facebook page. Lots of great resources there. I want to thank Andrew and Catherine, Shamila, and Chris for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen